Chaco Canyon's ancient rulers were assumed to be temporary, their authority earned through ceremony rather than blood. Then, a sealed crypt inside the largest structure in the ancient American Southwest gave up a secret it had been keeping for over 300 years. A single maternal bloodline, buried layer by layer across more than a dozen generations, hidden behind masonry walls and surrounded by more wealth than any other site in the region. When DNA finally cracked the code, it did not just reveal who these people were. It rewrote everything archaeologists thought they understood about inherited power in early America. The answer began with one burial and ended with a dynasty. In the high desert of northwest New Mexico, the ruins of Chaco Canyon stretch across a landscape that feels ancient, even by geological standards. The great houses here, built from sandstone, hauled across miles of open terrain, once rose 4 stories high. Pueblo Bonito was the largest of them all, a crescent-shaped complex of over 650 rooms that dominated the canyon floor for centuries. When a team from the Hyde exploring expedition arrived in 1896 under archaeologist George Pepper, they came looking for answers. What they found instead was something that would take more than 100 years to fully understand. Deep inside Pueblo Bonito, behind a wall of carefully placed masonry, they broke into room 33. Inside was a crypt unlike anything previously documented in the American Southwest. 14 individuals had been interred here across more than 3 centuries, each burial separated by wooden slabs and woven mats. The grave goods were extraordinary. Over 11,000 turquoise beads and pendants, more than recovered from any other site in the region. Abalone and conch shells carried from the Pacific and Gulf coasts hundreds of miles away. Ceremonial flutes, carved staffs, silver ornaments, and ceramic cylinder jars bearing traces of cacao, a substance whose nearest source was the tropical forests of Central America. The walls bore evidence of repeated ritual burning. Most people at Chaco were buried outside the settlement, with almost nothing to mark their passing. These individuals were different in every measurable way. The crypt's location within Pueblo Bonito was not accidental. It occupied a central, protected position, accessible only through sealed corridors, invisible to anyone who did not already know it was there. Anthropologist Adam Watson, who spent years cataloging Chacoan artifacts, describes the arrangement as a material language of privilege. The most lavishly equipped burials cluster at the crypt's deepest core. Peripheral burials added across later centuries are marked by fewer offerings and simpler goods. A hierarchy expressed not in words, but in the weight of turquoise and the placement of shells. To be buried at the heart of room 33 was to belong to something that extended far, beyond a single lifetime. In 2017, archaeologist Douglas Kennett led a team that finally had the tools to ask the question the crypt had always been holding. Using next-generation sequencing, they extracted DNA from the dense petrous bones of 9 individuals whose remains had sat in the archives of the American Museum of Natural History for over a century. The results stopped the field cold. Every single one of the 9 carried an identical mitochondrial DNA profile. Mitochondrial DNA passes exclusively from mother to child, unchanged across generations, except for rare mutations. What Kennett's team was looking at was a single unbroken maternal line running from the earliest burial, dated by radiocarbon, to around 800 CE, all the way to the latest, just before 1130 CE. 330 years, one bloodline. Nuclear DNA. Analysis confirmed what the mitochondrial evidence implied. Direct family relationships emerged from the data. Mothers and daughters, grandmothers and grandsons, a dynasty maintained not through appointment, but through birth. For decades, the debate in Chacoan archaeology had circled the same question. Was leadership here inherited or earned? The genetic evidence from room 33 answered it definitively. Power passed through the maternal line. This was hereditary rule in a society that many had assumed operated on more egalitarian terms. The mitochondrial haplogroup at the center of it all was haplogroup B2, a lineage still carried by living Pueblo communities today. The reach of this dynasty was not limited to the canyon. Geochemist Jane Sorensen applied isotope analysis to the tooth enamel of elite burials, measuring strontium and oxygen ratios that lock into place during childhood and never change. These chemical signatures act as a geological passport. Most individuals from room 33 matched the local profile of the Chaco Basin, but several did not. Their ratios pointed to the Chusca Mountains over 50 miles to the west, and to communities near the Salmon Ruins nearly 100 kilometers to the northwest. At least 20% of the elite burials grew up somewhere other than Chaco, and yet they were interred at its very heart. These were not outsiders absorbed by accident. They were welcomed into the highest ranks of a society whose trade networks stretched across the continent. Those networks left traces everywhere: cacao residue on ceramic jars, scarlet macaw feathers from humid forests far to the south, copper bells and spiny oyster shells from the Gulf of California. Over 400 kilometers of engineered roads radiated outward from the canyon, some of them 30 meters wide and running in perfectly straight lines across rough terrain, connecting outlying great houses, mining districts, and distant communities into a single organized system. The turquoise in room 33 was traced to the Cerritos Hills nearly 300 kilometers away. The dynasty buried there did not just inherit power. They maintained it by controlling the flow of rare materials and people across an enormous geography. That control ended abruptly. Tree ring records from ancient timbers at Chaco Canyon show a sharp environmental downturn beginning around 1130 CE. A severe drought gripped the region, one of the worst in 1,000 years, and construction across the canyon stopped almost immediately. Skeletal remains from this period show the consequences written in bone: lines etched across tooth enamel from childhood malnutrition, porous lesions indicating chronic anemia, smaller, more fragile frames replacing the robust builds of earlier generations. In room 33, the sequence of elite burials ends precisely when the drought begins. No new interments after 1130 CE. The maternal line that had held authority for over 3 centuries simply vanishes from the record. The communities that had sent goods and people to Chaco began to disperse. Trade networks unraveled. Great houses across the region fell silent. By the close of the 12th century, the canyon's monumental architecture stood empty, not from conquest, but from the slow accumulation of hunger and failed harvests that no dynasty, however deep its roots, could outlast. But the story did not end there. The mitochondrial haplogroup identified in room 33 still runs through the bloodlines of Pueblo peoples today. Oral histories passed across generations among the Zuni, Hopi, and Acoma had always described matrilineal descent and ancestral ties to the canyon. For those communities, the DNA was not a revelation. It was a confirmation. By 2024, after years of negotiation, the remains from room 33 began the process of repatriation under federal law. The people of Chaco Canyon are not a vanished civilization. Their descendants are still here, and the ancient bloodline, 3 centuries old, and counting, is still speaking.